Good afternoon and welcome to Creating Safer Streets with Demonstration Projects. My name is Emiko Atherton and I serve as the Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is a program of Smart Growth America. And today we're here to hear from 3 cities who have used what they've learned on Complete Streets, delivery, and implementation to create demonstration projects that have improved safety in their communities using community engagement, proven safety countermeasures, and tactical urbanism. So with that, let's get started. So before we get started, I wanted to give an overview of the Safe Streets Smart Cities Academy and where these projects were created. So if you're not familiar with the program, it was funded through the Road to Zero initiative, which is a national initiative run out of the National Safety Council to move towards zero deaths. This grant program funded Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition to provide technical assistance to 3 communities to work on safe systems integration and then to demonstrate their knowledge into demonstration projects. We here at the Coalition ran a competitive application to choose the 3 jurisdictions we worked with, and after speaking with communities and seeing their written applications, we ended up choosing the cities of Durham, North Carolina, Huntsville, Alabama, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Over the series of 9 months, we met in person as a cohort, so that's all 3 cities, and we had 6 distance learning modules to again learn about proven safety countermeasures. And what do I mean by that? It's countermeasures such as a roundabout or as simple as a sidewalk that we know increase safety for all users. We learned about creative placemaking and really bringing the creative process into design and implementation and community engagement. We participated in peer learning activities where we often went out and looked at a challenge site within a community and then brainstorm as a 3-city cohort what those solutions could be. And then in the end, each city picked one site where they wanted to build a temporary safety countermeasure and planned and implemented a safety demonstration project. So today's webinar, we'll hear from those 3 cities about what they learned and how that translated into projects. From the city of Durham, we'll hear from Ann Phillips and Leslie Tracy. In Huntsville, we will hear from Paige Colburn and Clint Johns. In Pittsburgh, we'll hear from Kristen Saunders and Katie Sawyers. How questions will work, because I'm sure you'll have many, is that you'll be able to type your questions into the Q&A box in the lower left-hand corner. At the end, Heather Zaccaro, Program Manager for the Coalition, will moderate the Q&As with the speakers. So again, if you're interested in submitting a question, please do that in the lower left-hand corner. And with that, let's start with our first city. We're going to start with the community we visited in January, Durham, North Carolina, and their West Club Boulevard project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ann and Leslie.
Hi everyone, I'm Leslie Tracy and I'm here with Ann Phillips in Durham, North Carolina. And we're here to talk about our project that we completed on West Club Boulevard. West Club Boulevard is a street it's a little bit north of downtown. It's a 4-lane divided cross-section in the area that we were looking at. It transitions to a 5-lane cross-section on either end. It's got an ADT of about 16,000 vehicles per day. It's got a speed limit of 35 miles an hour, and the 85th percentile speed was measured at around 38 miles an hour. And it's bordered on the north side by Northgate Mall, which is a large shopping mall, although it's not very popular these days. And then it's on the rest of the area it's bordered on by neighborhoods mainly. And this area has been on our radar for a couple of years. We wanted to do something to improve it. because it's a kind of a high crash area for pedestrians and bicyclists. You can see on the map here, the green dots are pedestrian crashes and the pink dots are bicycle crashes. There have been a couple of fatalities in this corridor in the last 10 years or so, mostly because of double threat crossings. Somebody starts their crossing in front of the bus, the person in the adjacent lane doesn't see them and hits them. So we've been wanting to do something for a few years to improve pedestrian safety here, because the bus stops, there's one on the south side of the road and one on the north side of the road. The bus stops are some of the highest used bus stops in the city. There are about 150 weekday boardings at each stop. And you can see on the slide the rider demographics for the Go Durham system. About 68% African American, 63% don't have a car, and 75% make less than $25,000 a year. So we decided to use this corridor for our demonstration project, and the first step was to talk to the folks in the area about, what they'd like to see out there, and that's what Ann is going to talk about.
Thanks, Leslie. So we got to, going into this project, we knew that we really wanted to engage the bus riders because we wanted to make the safe spacer for people who use the bus and walk. And we also knew that a lot of the traditional methods of outreach that we used, public meetings, online engagement, are often not sufficient to meet those riders. We did some pretty intensive public engagement. I think I did the math, and we ended up engaging 951 residents over the life of this project. And there were two pretty distinct rounds. So in the first round, we did an online survey for about 4 weeks, and then we went out and did intercept interviews at the bus stop. We also went to a neighborhood meeting and neighborhood events like the Northgate Children's Festival and sent emails to residents. And the second round, we learned a lot from the first round. For instance, the first time we went out, and I think this other slide talks about it, we knew that our survey was a bit long and people were reluctant to take it. So we shortened the survey the second time around, and that really helped people to want to take it. The other thing we noticed was the different results we got depending on the type of outreach. So online, the demographics were pretty stark. Most of the folks who took the online survey the first time around were white, pretty well educated. I think many people had a graduate degree, and they didn't really use the space as vulnerable users. So you can see, I think this got a little messed up, but most of the folks drove most of the time when they were in the space. So another thing we did was we were considering a crosswalk, and we were trying to consider, where we wanted to put it. So when we were out doing intercept surveys, we did a lot of crossing observations and asked people to report where they crossed. We also asked people to report where they crossed on the online survey, and you can see that it was almost completely opposite, where people were reporting they were crossing online or where people were actually crossing that we observed or that they self-reported. In spite of the fact that most online users did not really use or experience the space as vulnerable roadway users, they still recognized that vulnerable roadway user safety was an issue. The most common suggestion we received was that we needed a safer way to cross or crossing with a signal. Several people mentioned road diets, and speed management also came up. From the intercept interviews, as I mentioned, the first time around, people felt like the survey was a bit long. So we did develop a shorter comment form that helped us to collect responses from more informal conversations. We went out about 4 times and collected 46 responses and observed 84 crossings. So some of the questions we asked are how often do you come here? What 2 things can we do to make this area safer? And of course, we also asked about crossing behavior. So from the intercept surveys, I think the important takeaway was it confirmed our suspicion, we really needed to provide a safer way for folks to cross. And the thing that we found somewhat surprising was most people intuitively knew that a crosswalk was not going to solve the problem. So many people asked for additional measures. which was primarily a signal, but often referred to as a traffic light or some kind of light that pedestrians could push to cross. Lots of folks mentioned that they felt unsafe because of how fast cars were going on the roadway. Another engagement tool that we used was artwork. We knew that we wanted to do some creative placemaking in this area. It's not the most visually appealing area, so we thought this was a great opportunity to sort of tie it into the city a bit more. So we worked with a local artist who created 2 design concepts, and we did an online voting and in-person voting at events. The picture on the left is at our Earth Day Festival, and I think like over 300 people voted on the artwork and selected the design on the right. So the artwork was, I think, helped to also build a lot of excitement and goodwill towards the project. So it's definitely an engagement tool that I would try to use again. And now I'm going to turn it back to Leslie to talk about the project improvements.
Right. So once we had all the data from the surveys, we ended up building a permanent crosswalk. Since we had a open contract at the time with a contractor who was doing ramps around the city for us, and so we just added this work to the contract, and he built the Z-style crossing in the median. And then we did a temporary road diet we had it out there for about 3 weeks. We took a lane away in each direction, did it with cones. And then recently we added a rectangular rapid flashing beacon and RRSB to both crossings, which has really helped. And the next slide shows some of the results that we got. 73% of the people surveyed when we went back and did after surveys said that the project increased their feeling of safety. We got a 4-mile-an-hour reduction in the 85th percentile speed, and we got an increase in drivers yielding from 0% drivers yielding to about 24% of drivers yielding to pedestrians in the crosswalk. And that was before we put the RRFB in, so we're anticipating that number will go up even more. And then we also got a 4-second reduction in the pedestrian delayed across the street. And you can see a picture there on the slide. The artwork went in just, I think, last week or this week.
Going in this week. It's in progress.
Yeah, it's still in a work in progress, but you can see that it's coming out. It's coming out very nicely, so we're really proud of how it came out. And some of the lessons that we learned from the project, do you want to start with implementation? Oh, yeah. Well, we learned the power of data, for one thing. We collected more data on this project than we have on any other, and it was a lot of work, but when you go out to talk to neighborhoods and the public, just having this data really helps people see, what kind of results you can get from doing a little bit of work in this area. And then also, we probably didn't allow enough time for implementation. We ended up kind of really hurrying through implementation, and it all worked out. But definitely next time, I think we're going to provide more time for that.
And then the other thing that we were able to do is leverage some of our partnerships to help with the data collection. The intercept surveys was really labor intensive, but we were lucky enough to have some of our bike advocates volunteer to do some of that work. And they reported back that it was really valuable and useful for their work to get insights by talking to folks at the bus stop. So that's definitely something we would try to replicate in the future as well.
And so I think that's it, and we're going to turn it back over to Amico.
Great. Thank you so much. That was great. Now we're going to turn over to our team in Huntsville, Alabama, and their 4-mile post project. So Paige and Clint, let's hear from you next.
Thank you, Amico. This is Paige Colburn, and I am going to cover the slides for the most part, and I'll ask Clint for some input periodically, and I think a lot of the Q&A will probably go to Clint as well because he was actually on the ground working this project and making it happen. But the purpose of our presentation is to talk about the challenges that Huntsville faces in implementing Complete Streets projects in general, and how this demonstration project helped us to face some of those challenges. So we'll start with a little history lesson about the City of Huntsville for those of you who aren't familiar with us. This big brown thing that you see in the center of our city is Redstone Arsenal, but it was not there yet in 1920. In 1920, the city limits of Huntsville were that little red box there that you see in the center of the screen, and our population was 8,018 people. In 20 years, the red box really didn't get much bigger. Those are the city limits of Huntsville. In 1940, population hadn't even doubled in 20 years. 1950, a little bit more in the 30 years since the turn of the century. For those of you who know anything at all about Huntsville, Alabama, the Rocket City, you know what's coming next. In the 60s and 70s, we quadrupled in population and our city limits exploded. We call this the pancake batter effect for the coming decades. You see the city limits and our population there at the bottom of the screen just growing and growing and growing. And Redstone Arsenal again exists now, and so we're hugging Redstone Arsenal as tight as we can. And then we get into the 2010s where we surround our sister city of Madison. That's there in the white. And finally, in 2018, we are 218.2 square miles. We're ranked 28th in terms of land area in cities over 100,000 in the country. And we have about 200,000 people. So we are under 100 people per square mile. So we are a very sprawling city. We are larger than Atlanta. We are a bigger city than Las Vegas. We're bigger than Denver. We're bigger than Philadelphia. And if you compare the populations there, Atlanta is twice our population with 50% fewer square miles. And similarly with Vegas is 3 times our population. Denver is 3 times our population. And Philadelphia, we're only 20% at most, maybe 15% of their population, and they're easily 60 to 70 square miles smaller than us. So that is our biggest problem with implementing Complete Streets policies. We have this kind of development in our city. It is a development that was built when people wanted it during the 60s and 70s and 80s. This is what people wanted. They wanted to spread out and live in the suburbs as far away from the arsenal as they could get and then drive to work on great big highways. And we have plenty of those. So as we started changing in the early aughts and in the 2000s, we tried to look where can we implement things like Complete Streets, things that everybody's asking for, alternative modes of transportation, transit, bike, and ped. And we went back to that little red dot, that small square that became a slightly bigger square and a slightly bigger square. We started with our downtown master plan and came up with lots of options around downtown where we could do bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And this led to several improvements downtown, several pilot projects that created Complete Streets in downtown Huntsville. Smart Growth America was helpful with that and brought us a Complete Streets workshop in 2016 that helped some of our pilot projects get off the ground. And so enter Smart Growth America again in 2018 with the Safe Streets Smart Cities Academy. This brought our Complete Streets out of downtown. This is everybody on our trolley heading out of downtown. We had the workshop. There's our mayor talking about it in downtown, and then we brought everybody out of downtown into this picture that you can see in the upper right-hand corner is a very non-downtown looking street. That picture is 4 Mile Post, and 4 Mile Post is a wide and long street that connects a major residential area to one of the primary routes to get to Redstone Arsenal. So it's often used for commuters, and commuters often go very fast on it. When we started our rounds of public outreach in relationship to this street, we were talking about connecting these two places that you see here on the screen, Jones Farm Park and the Aldrich Creek Greenway. There was not really a safe way to get from point A to point B for bicyclists and pedestrians. That arrow there is the Aldrich Creek Greenway, which is one of our longest greenways in the city. Highly used greenway. We got bike and ped counts for this project coming off of that greenway and using the crosswalk, which comes down from that park you see with the star there. And we didn't have a lot of safe crossings at that crosswalk. We saw several accidents over the last several years. One involved a pedestrian, and we heard from that pedestrian's family going into this, and two involved cars that were rear-ended while they were stopped for somebody in the crosswalk. And one thing that you can see, I think it's in the next slide, that this road is a 3-lane divided, and the center turn lane is very lightly done. A lot of people were using the center turn lane to pass around drivers who were stopped for somebody in the crosswalk. So even if drivers did choose to yield for pedestrians or cyclists in the crosswalk, sometimes another driver would just go right around them in that lightly painted double-line turn lane there. So this is the crosswalk, the sidewalk crossing a bridge that you see with a large shoulder there in the middle to get to that beautiful greenway on the right. So our before and after images, we did a lot of public outreach in terms of meeting people where they were. We went to business association meetings. We went to daycare centers that were located nearby. We went to lots of different places and just spoke to people. And one of the first things we got back, because we had been talking about, well, let's get people safely from point A to point B. One of the first things they said is, don't do that, just slow people down. Everybody was like, everyone goes too fast. The speed is the real problem. So our team looked at removing that center turn lane and only making it a turn right there going into that neighborhood. And honestly, you didn't even need a turn going into the neighborhood because there were only 18 houses on a dead-end street. So they could conceivably just turn even without a turn lane. But one of the first challenges that we faced as a team from leadership was that at the same time as our project was going on, we had a situation in City Council with a different project in a different part of town entirely. The elected officials who represent this district where 4 Mile Post is, they were 100% for it. They loved this project. They were excited to do it. They wanted us to make all the corrections that we could, but a different council person in a different part of the city had a project that we were doing over there, a downtown project, and just was not a fan. So that made our leaders, our department heads, nervous about taking a lane away, even as a demonstration. We were talking about doing something very similar to what Durham did with the cones and the temporary road diet to show that people could move through this path without a turn lane, and just having it as 2 lanes and then setting up bike lanes on both sides and all sorts of stuff. We had grand ideas. But what we ended up with, as you see on this slide, is this is the temporary paint. We've made it permanent since traffic engineering really called attention to that turn lane in a way that it hadn't before, and we've seen significantly less passing movement in that turn lane because of those left turn arrows, because of the way the turn lane actually looks like a turn lane that you're not supposed to pass people in now. Another improvement that we made here is the crosswalk before and after. Heather with Smart Growth America almost got hit in this crosswalk while everyone was here in Huntsville. You can read about that in one of the Huntsville sections on Smart Growth America's blog. But part of the reason is you can see this curb is so far away from where the street actually is. The street in the left picture there, you can see the grass is up against where traffic actually is, but the curb is all the way back. It's several feet back. So we've bumped out the curb. We've added an RRFV. these are all permanent improvements. A lot of this was represented by cones and things like that during the demonstration project. And RFB is on both sides, and bumping out the curbs so there's less distance that bikes and pedestrians have to cross, much more visibility in that crosswalk, and moving on down the street, we implemented with sticks and flags and just sort of talking to people and handing out flyers and things like that. In our demonstration project, we imagined this much, much wider sidewalk, more of a multi-use path kind of sidewalk for bikes and pedestrians, and we had it all flagged out so people could see this is how much room that you might have in the future. And then we've implemented it since then and turned it into a multi-use path from the crosswalk down to the greenway, or to the bridge first. And then when you get to the bridge, you used to have this wide shoulder on the left and the sidewalk, and that big drop-off between the sidewalk and the bridge. And while we were out there, we did our public engagement in the neighborhood out there many times, going door to door, talking to people who were passing. We saw mothers with strollers walking on that shoulder, on that bridge, just right next to the traffic, because the sidewalk was too narrow for some of the bigger strollers, or if they had a dog and a stroller, or if it was two mothers and two strollers, for example, they were just walking right there on that shoulder on the bridge. So what we did for our demonstration project was to put up temporary delineators and some temporary paint, and what you see on the right now is the permanent installation of a protected shoulder bike facility, or really anything with wheels facility. And then we hope that we'll have the pedestrians go up on the sidewalk, and then everybody else can use that shoulder that connects them to the multi-use path you saw on the prior slide. And that is our project. We had a opening event for the project that was really exciting. We invited all of the people that we had done public outreach with. Rotary came, the South Huntsville Business Association came, some of the schools and daycare children came, and they stood on the side of the road with like flags that were like, "Pay attention to me." And so that was actually a really good project. And we thank Smart Growth America and everybody else for participating. We learned so much from Durham and Pittsburgh. And I'll turn it back over to Emiko.
Great. Thank you so much, Paige and Clint. Last, we'll hear from our team up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they'll talk about their Lincoln and Frankstone Avenues project. I'm really excited to hear about this as well. So Katie and Kristen, will you kick it off?
All right, thank you. Hello and welcome to, now we're jumping to Pittsburgh. My name is Kristen Saunders. I'm a planner with the department, and my other presenter is Katie Sawyer, who is an engineer with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure at the City of Pittsburgh. So our project, we were awarded the Safe Streets Smart Cities Academy participant, and we started looking, we decided to work on the intersection of Lincoln and Frankstown. I just wanted to start from, I'm sorry, there we go. Okay. So one of the great values of this project was really bringing a big team together. We often work with a lot of partners in our work, but really being very intentional about making sure that that we had all the right people in the room. And I think another great thing about this project is we were really all working together. Often we reach out to our partners when we need to know something or get something from them. This really felt more like a group of people walking together towards an end goal of a safer intersection. So it was exciting to work with our public schools, with United Way, with our regional planning organization, and Allegheny County, as well as our transit organization. So we started out with intersection selection. We didn't really have an exact product in mind when we applied for this grant. And so we went out and thought about how we would select a particular intersection. So of course we wanted to address a safety concern, so we were looking for a high crash corridor or a high crash intersection. But we also wanted to kind of use this as an opportunity to reach out to a community where maybe there are a lot of crashes, but we actually aren't hearing many 311, which is our sort of citizen request. We aren't hearing much feedback about the danger of this intersection. So we looked for an area with high crashes with few 311s or sort of citizen feedback. We also, we have a lot of state-owned roads in our city, so we wanted to make sure that we had control over the road. And then we also wanted to look for, since it's a demonstration project using relatively simple materials, we wanted to look for an intersection where we felt confident we wanted to invest in the future. So something that didn't just have a new traffic signal installed within the last couple of years. So we actually selected the site. You can see it in the top right in yellow. That's Lincoln and Frankstown. It's about a half-mile walk from our busway, which is a sort of dedicated bus highway from the East Liberty Station. And it's between the neighborhoods of Larimer and Homewood. And the intersection has, you can kind of see an image of it here. It's one of those really funky intersections that a lot of cities have where there's 5 legs leaving from it. But it has kind of a mix of community uses, churches, an elementary school, the Garden Resource Center, as well as things like a gas station. So it's kind of a, let's say, mixed-use intersection. And here's a plan view. You can kind of see how everything's really set back from the intersection. There's kind of a really mostly parking lot, land uses on 3 corners, as well as some green space that's attached to the school on the 3rd quarter. And there's a lot of space. And some of the things that we saw in the crash data, because of the geometry of the intersection, people are making really fast turns, and kind of that top crosswalk, you're actually crossing 2 streets, but it's tied into one single crossing in the light. Another thing we looked at, we knew that one of our main stakeholders would be Lincoln Elementary School. And they, their feeder pattern, a lot of people are coming from the north to enter the school, and they have about 43% of their students are actually walking. So we knew that they would be a big stakeholder. Unfortunately, because of this big group we pulled together, on our team we had Bree McDaniel, who was a public health educator with the Allegheny County Health Department. And they worked on a project called Road Rules with PennDOT. It was a partnership with PennDOT where they were already going into schools and teaching them about seatbelt safety, safe walking, and street safety. And so since we had Bree on our team, we were able to go into Lincoln. She was able to go into Lincoln Elementary School and add some questions kind of about the intersection itself, which is really exciting. So she was a critical part of our team. She has an amazing amount of talking to students, 14 presentations and 250 students. I think this was done over a couple of days. And we got a lot of really good feedback from that interaction. So in addition to her kind of typical road safety program, we also added this worksheet where students could tell us kind of where they currently cross the street, where they would like to cross the street, and where they'd like to see plants and artwork. And we got a lot of really cute feedback, but also a lot of really valuable feedback. So here's a picture of the cute. And then we also kind of tried to tabulate some of that information. So looking at where students are currently crossing, where they'd like to cross, and where they'd like to see more interesting things on their walk. And one thing we learned from this is that students aren't crossing right in front of the school. They're not crossing only at the intersection, but they're crossing, you can see that little street called Mayflower Street. So because of this feedback, we actually expanded our project to include not just the intersection, but also Mayflower and an intersection on the other side of the school. Some of the feedback that we got, from the students was that they don't really feel safe crossing, and the cars go too fast. And Katie's going to talk a little bit more about that data. And we got a lot of really great suggestions. We're still waiting to implement this, but I like the idea of a light to tell cars, here come the kids. And now Katie's going to talk a little bit about our more community outreach outside the school.
So we worked a little bit more with adults and other residents in the community, not necessarily connected to the school. I'm sure there are some parents that were involved in this deliberative democracy evening. But so deliberative democracy is an initiative or a type of forum that our mayor's office likes to use. I believe it was developed by Carnegie Mellon, Penn State, sorry. So it's a kind of interesting format. You have a group of people that come together. You separate them into groups. They talk about a specific topic in separate groups, but they don't have subject matter experts with them. They're able to sort of talk about issues, maybe come up with some ideas, without someone present constantly, shooting down their ideas. So they're really allowed to really think openly about an issue. And then at the end of the evening, the groups then present their ideas to an expert panel. So in our panel there were 4 people: myself, Steve Kudrow from our police department, Breen Massiotra from our Port Authority. Both of them were part of our cohort for this program. And then also Demi Kolke from City Planning. So the groups were able to go around and each present either an issue or a suggestion, and then everyone listened to the responses from the expert panel. I thought it was a really great way to interact with residents, and I definitely did appreciate not just having to say over and over again, no, we can't do an exclusive pedestrian phase at this intersection because of X, Y, and Z. So I thought it was a really positive way to kind of engage the community. So this is some of the things that we heard from the deliberative democracy. So we've separated this table out into the different modes and how people are using the intersection. And I think one thing that's interesting is that the intersection is difficult for everyone. So we were talking about drivers, pedestrians, bikers, pedestrians, older pedestrians, things like that. When we look at how the intersection is working, it's really not working for anyone. So that was really useful. And there's some more information that we received. So for example, it's scary at night. It's barren and exposed to sun and cold. It's also depressing. So that was some additional feedback that we received. So some of the kind of tools that we decided to implement here. As Kristen was saying, at the Frankstown-Lincoln intersection, that kind of crazy 5-pointed intersection, just from visiting the site, it was very difficult to cross where you see the header saying shorter crosswalk. That's a very dangerous crossing for pedestrians because vehicles that are traveling eastbound, which is to the right here, vehicles that are traveling eastbound wishing to make that sort of soft left were waiting for an opening in traffic to be able to make that left. There was no protected left turn phase. And they were sort of hanging out in the middle of the intersection, and by the time they found an opening, they just sort of gunned it and weren't looking for pedestrians. So that's something that we definitely heard in the deliberative democracy, both from drivers who said that they didn't feel comfortable making that turn, and from pedestrians saying that they didn't feel comfortable making that crossing. So from that input, we were able to add a dedicated left turn lane and also a protected left turn arrow at the signal. Our traffic shop was able to make that upgrade. One of the ideas that we had explored too was Lowell Street, which is actually kind of the hard left that you see there. We considered making that one way and trying to tee off the intersection more and really reducing the size of the intersection. However, after investigating the existing traffic signal and sort of looking at ADA concerns and things like that, we decided that was a bigger project than just a short demonstration project. But we do look forward to sort of pursuing some of those ideas with a new traffic signal when the time comes to really redesign this intersection. Some other things that we did were pedestrian islands for the uncontrolled crossings to help kids get across the street to the school, whether they're being dropped off by their parents or walking to school. So we were able to install 3 new pedestrian islands at uncontrolled crossings. And then we also, at the 5-pointed intersection, we did some bump outs. We did a pedestrian island at the signalized intersection, and then we were able to add some planters and things like that. So the impact that this project had when we collected both before and after speed data in the area. So before, the median speed was about 30 miles an hour on average throughout the day. After, it was 27, which is a decrease of 3 miles an hour, which is okay. But where we saw the biggest impact was specifically during the school time, when there are flashing school zone indicators in this corridor. So people do know when school is letting in and letting out. Drivers were actually before going about 29 miles an hour on average. That's the median speed. And after the project, they were going about 21 miles an hour. So that was a change of 8 miles an hour, which can make a huge impact, especially when you have kids crossing the street often. So we were very happy about that change. So here's some of the features I was talking about. The pedestrian islands, which shorten the crossings for kids. They can also make a 2-stage crossing, and allows us to also put in the pedestrian paddles pretty easily where they're prominently visible. And then we were able to put in planters as well. And then we also had a really fun party when we hosted everyone here in Pittsburgh. So right when school let out, we shut down one of the streets, and the school kids were able to come out and hang out with us, which is really fun. So you can see here we had a little parade. We had a beatbox, paraded back and forth across the street. So really fun event before it started raining. And so this was our project team, everyone that participated with us. I think for us, some of the things we installed aren't really groundbreaking for us, but I think the most important thing for us was approaching a project from a kind of a different direction, involving all of our different partners early on, and really working together to deliver a better project.
Yeah, and that's the end of our presentation. I think some of the other lessons learned are really working with the school because they do know best. Spreading out the sort of traffic calming installations so you're not trying to slow traffic right when a vehicle gets to the school. And then again, we're definitely going to repeat the idea of really working with our partners early on and working in a very in a close way with people who work with inside schools. So I think that was really, really valuable feedback. So thank you, and we'll pass it back to Emiko.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I think we both here in DC spoke at the same time. I was just going to say thank you so much for sharing your projects and your stories. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Zakara, who is the program manager for the coalition, where she's going to moderate the Q&A. And just as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for tuning in today, and thank you especially to our 6 team members from the 3 cities for taking the time to share your stories with all of us. We have plenty of really great questions, but more are coming in, so yes, as Emiko said, please remember to type your questions in the bottom left-hand corner. If we don't have time to get to your question today, don't worry, we're actually going to follow up with our presenters to answer some more of your questions in our recap blog post. And I'm actually going to answer the first question myself. A few of you asked about whether we're recording this webinar, whether the slides that you're seeing today are going to be available, and the answer is yes. Our recap blog post will also include the full slide deck as well as the video of today's webinar. The next question, we got quite a few questions about why certain parts of the projects became permanent or didn't. So I'm going to open this up to all 3 cities. Which aspects of your temporary project either are already permanent or are you planning to make permanent? And which aren't? And if you could just briefly talk a little bit about why. We'll start with the team from Durham.
Okay, yeah, we did build the crosswalk on Club Boulevard. We did build that to be permanent, mainly because, like I said during the presentation, we did have an open contract and we were able to come up with some money for that. That was funded with money that wasn't part of the grant, so it came out of our department budget. But we did that mainly because we didn't want to put a temporary crosswalk in and then have to take it out and figure out a way to build it. We did have this open contract, and there's, the crosswalk has been needed out there for years. So we decided to go ahead and do that. We did the temporary road diet, which we actually really liked that process because, we get a lot of pushback sometimes on road diets where people get annoyed that you're taking lanes away and that you're slowing them down, and once the road diet actually goes in, a lot of those concerns go away because they realize that you're not actually, it doesn't actually take them a whole lot longer to get through, and a lot of times it ends up being an improvement for cars. So doing the temporary actually showed people that you can take a lane away without sacrificing too much capacity, and so we have decided to make the road diet permanent. We've got some outreach to do before we can do that, and we've got some design work, but we're hoping to do that maybe next year. And then we also put in the RRFB after the road diet was taken away to improve the crossing, since people now had to cross 2 lanes. And again, that came out of our department's budget. So the whole project, I think, once it's done, it's going to be a real improvement. But yeah, the road diet is definitely, and it's going to be extended too. It's not going to just include that one block. It's going to be extended all the way to, it's about 3 or 4 blocks, and it's going to connect with a trail that runs north-south near there. Did I forget anything?
No, I think that's really great. I think the other thing you brought up was, like, yesterday when we talked about this, was had we put in the road diet and taken it away, that might have been deeply politically unpopular. Sorry, the crosswalk. And so I think pairing the crosswalk with the road diet really, like, garnered a lot of goodwill. So I think it was very politically strategic.
Yeah,
well.
We got a lot of good feedback from that.
Thank you so much. What about Huntsville? Paige and Clint, can you talk a little bit about which parts of your project are permanent and which aren't, and why?
Yeah, so we had, this is Clint, by the way, we had some things that we wanted to do permanent long-term, like the RRFBs that we installed. We initially installed them on just some square channel posts to go ahead and get them up for our demonstration project, get some feedback, see if they were as effective as we thought they would be. And then, obviously, in the final permanent project, we put them on the standard pedestrian ped poles and that type of stuff. But one other thing that we did that was temporary was the crossing there at the bridge. We didn't have a path to put them on, so for temporarily wise, we created a small transition out of asphalt that got them from the bridge shoulder onto the sidewalk. And that also, again, was more of a proof of concept. Will people use this path? Is it worth building a future permanent project too? And obviously they both turned out well. The temporary things that we didn't use after the permanent project would be the uprights. We had a lot of those that we used in the temporary project to help define that transition area around the bridge, kind of curve them on and then curve them back off. The permanent project actually installed some curb along the roadway. We extended the curb and gutter, and that provided a positive separation that could take a lot of those vertical uprights, and didn't need those.
Thanks, Clint. And what about Pittsburgh? Katie and Kristen?
Hi. So we never, this is Kristen, we never pitched the project to the community as being temporary. We always said that we are trying out some changes. We're going to assess, we're trying out some changes with the intention of making a permanent improvement. And one of our intersection selection criteria was to pick an intersection where we wanted to make an investment. So this particular intersection, hasn't seen a lot of investment. If you noticed on the original photo of the intersection, the lights are still hanging on old trolley poles. So this is an intersection where we knew we needed to do a signal upgrade in the coming years, and we're working on identifying funding for that now. So I think all of the improvements will be maintained until made permanent, with all of the temporary materials. We do have a survey online now, and we're going to do some outreach in the school this year to really ask people how it's working, if there's anything else we can upgrade. so that as we make our permanent, designs for the permanent improvements, we can incorporate some feedback. Anything else, Katie? Okay.
Great, thank you so much. We've gotten a lot of questions also about the funding and the budget for these projects. So I'm going to start with a question for Emiko. We had some folks ask about the source of the funding for these projects. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the sources of funding, and each city could answer individually as well, but we actually gave each community $8,000, which they had to match either through in-kind donations or through cash. We left it up to them to figure out how to raise that. I would say, though, we have found that a little can go a really long way. In the case studies that are available online, you can see the actual project cost. And if you're trying to figure out where you might find your own source of funding, I'd look at your local foundations. AARP offers an annual Livable Communities Challenge grant that has funded projects like this. You can also look at programs like the National Association of Realtors Smart Growth grant program that has funded other projects. But I'd love to hear from each of the cities how they were able to fund the other half.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that as a follow-up. If each city could just briefly say what the budget of this project was relative to the other road projects that they usually carry out and how you matched that $8,000 grant from Smart Growth America. We'll go back in the opposite order this time. So Pittsburgh, I'm going to ask you all to answer first.
Yeah, this is Katie. So we ended up spending about $23,000 on this project, including the funding from Smart Growth America. We spent about $15,000 on paint and eradication of existing pavement markings. We used an existing city contract to do that, a contractor that we work with often. We spent $1,000 in materials for the signal change. Obviously, there's labor and equipment costs that went under our operating budget for our signal stop. And then we spent about $7,000 on vertical elements, so the flex posts, the wheel stops, the planters and dirt for the planters, things like that. Our Department of Public Works crew actually installed all of the vertical elements for us, so that was great. So overall we spent $23,000. The remainder that wasn't covered by Smart Growth America, we used our capital budget complete streets line item. We actually have a neighborhood traffic calming line item that we're allowed to use to kind of implement more quicker projects in response to resident concerns. So that's a really useful funding source for us to be able to kind of use small pots of money to make quick changes.
Great, thank you. How about Huntsville?
Clint and I can probably tag team this one a little bit. I have the totals for the demonstration project. We were fortunate enough we were able to make most of our changes permanent, and I think that's because we went so far into this process with the temporary road diet as the hallmark, the star of this show. And then when the temporary road diet got nixed, they sort of just let us go with whatever else we wanted to do that was not a temporary road diet. So we got fortunate there in that we could make everything permanent. Traffic engineering was already looking at this intersection for RRFBs. The RRFBs on the channel posts, the temporary posts, were about $9,000 total for both of them, so they were about $4,500 apiece. Our total project for the demonstration project was just under $16,500. We had some things donated for our event on the day of from Fleet Feet Sporting Goods, which is a store that's located close to 4 Mile Post, and they run a lot of our marathons and do a lot of work with runners and walkers in the community. They put in about $550 worth of volunteer stuff and handouts and printing. The Rotary Club of North Alabama donated another $500 or so in printing and T-shirts and bringing people out. We used our yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk signs that are still out there that have basically been a permanent installation. Were about $350 each. We have some new thermo and paint and things like that were in the running of about $1,000 each for everything else. We had 35 of those vertical uprights and various cans of paints and things like that. And Clint, do you have any numbers on how much we've spent on the permanent installation of some of this?
Yeah, I mean some of that rolls over to the permanent. We didn't use all the uprights. Some of the uprights are there on the bridge deck that are part of the existing temporary project. The yield to pedestrian signs that we put on between the travel lane and the turn lane are still there. The biggest cost of this whole project was the widening of the path. We have a greenway fund, and that came in right around $40,000 just in concrete, curb and gutter work, and drainage for that little section. So that was the biggest, and it actually came out of our greenway budget. So that was not really part of the project, but it kind of was.
Yeah, it was the permanent after the fact when everybody really liked the project as much as they did. We got so much positive feedback after the fact. And like I said, I think that our leadership was willing to do a lot of things for us, pretty much anything for this project that was not a road diet. So that was the positive that came out of the challenge to the road diet.
Thank you. And finally, Durham.
So we matched the $8,000 with the grant out of our department's budget, operations budget, and we spent most of that on the temporary road diet. We hired a contractor to put the cones out, and we had to rent the cones and signs and all of that for a few weeks. And the artwork, paying the artist for the artwork concepts and then the installation of the artwork. The rest of it was about $50,000, something like that. For the rest of it, for the permanent installations, most of that was the crosswalk. That cost about $30,000, I think, to do the concrete work out there. And then we had some incidental costs with the signs. We put some the RFBs out there, and that was probably about $15,000, something like that. So yeah, we spent more than $60,000 on the project with both the temporary and the permanent elements. And again, we had a surplus in our budget. This past year, one of our line items was much lower than usual, so that's the money that we used for that.
Thanks, everyone. There's a lot of questions left that we're not going to have time to get to, questions about overcoming opposition, the kinds of paint and materials that you used, and I'll follow up with everybody after this webinar to get some of those answered for our blog post. I want to take a second. We have tuning into the webinar some of the other team members from Huntsville, Durham, and Pittsburgh who participated in this process. And I want to just take a second to read out a comment from Chantal Lowe from Huntsville. She just wants to congratulate everyone who participated. She said she really enjoyed being a team member and meeting new friends along the way. And that it's an awesome thing to see planned community infrastructure and complete streets come to life after months of small visions. Chantal, thank you so much for those words, and I'll echo that. Huge thank you to everybody who participated along the way. That includes the team here at Smart America, all of the guest instructors that we brought in, and especially the really dedicated, passionate members from these three cities. It's been such a pleasure working with all of you. We're about out of time, but in closing, I just want to ask each team one more quick question. In just one sentence, if there's one tip that you would give another community who wants to do something similar, who wants to try out a temporary safety demonstration project, in just one sentence, what is one tip or lesson learned that you would give that community for who's just starting out? We'll start this time with Huntsville.
When you face challenge, because you will, and there will be opposition, have the data like Durham and Pittsburgh talked about, and have the public input right there. Just be able to picture all of the opposition that you could get. We did lots of practice sessions actually in the academy where we role-played the people yelling at us of the various things that we knew would be said about these projects. Prepare all of your answers in advance. Have members of the public who are champions for it. You know, Rotary and South Huntsville Business Association being the champions for this was huge for us. Have those answers, have those champions, have that data ready to go before the opposition even hits you.
Thanks, Paige. Pittsburgh, how about you? What's one tip for a community just starting out?
We've chatted, and our one tip is to have a party. Yeah, I mean, that's it. But this, you know, the picture that we've been looking at on our screen is from our sort of opening party. We had it during dismissal, so have a party at the right time, and of course, invite the right people. Don't be afraid to close the street for a party. I thought that was really successful. It was a really good way to engage with people. It was more than one sentence, but yeah, have a party.
Love it. And finally, Durham.
We would say really focus on planning. When we did the visits in the other cities, when we were planning this out, there was really a lot of stress put on the actual, laying out the timeline for the project, and that turned out to be so important. And even then, we still, it all came together kind of at the last minute. So, yeah, get your timeline down and stick to it.
Thanks so much. We're a little bit over time, so thank you again to everybody who tuned in. Thank you for sticking with us all the way until the end, and thank you to the six of you, Leslie Ann, Paige, Clint, Katie, and Kristen, for taking the time to share your stories with all of us today. With that, that's the conclusion of today's webinar. Stay tuned for the recap blog post. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.